The grand hall of the Velar High Council was a sight to behold. Tall, glowing pillars of crystal lined the massive chamber, and banners of ancient victories swayed gently from the ceiling. The room was filled with dozens of Velar officials, their golden eyes locked onto the single human standing in the center. Jonas Reed, a diplomat from the Terran Coalition, remained calm despite the heavy tension in the air. He could feel the hostility in their stares, the unspoken message clear: you are not welcome here. The Velar Dominion and the Terran Coalition had been on the brink of war for years. Skirmishes had turned deadly, and trust between the two races was thin as air. This meeting was supposed to be the first step toward peace, but Jonas knew it wouldn't be easy. At the far end of the hall, seated on a throne of obsidian, was King Valthyris, ruler of the Velar. Next to him, in a smaller but equally ornate seat, sat his daughter, Princess Soraya. Unlike the others, her expression was not of hatred, but of quiet curiosity. Jonas had read her file before coming here. Soraya was a brilliant tactician, known for leading Velar fleets into battle. Her people admired her, and many believed she would one day become queen, but she had never faced a human in person before. The silence was finally broken by General Kaver, a high-ranking Velar military leader. His deep voice echoed through the hall. Human. He spat the word as if it were poison. State your purpose. Why should we even entertain the idea of peace? Jonas smiled politely, keeping his voice steady. Because war benefits neither of us, General. We have fought long enough. Both our people have lost too much. A murmur rippled through the council members, but Kaver sneered. The only reason your kind wants peace is because you are weak. Jonas knew this was a trap. If he responded with anger, it would only confirm their belief that humans were too emotional, too undisciplined. Instead, he met the general's gaze with a calm, unwavering stare. Strength is not just about war, General. True strength is knowing when to stop fighting. For a moment, there was silence. Then laughter erupted from a few council members. Others whispered among themselves. Princess Soraya, however, said nothing. Her golden eyes studied Jonas carefully. Before the tension could rise further, King Valthyris raised his hand, and the room fell silent. Human, you speak of peace, but what proof do we have that your people will not betray us? He asked. Jonas nodded, expecting this question. He reached into his coat pocket slowly. Any sudden movement could be seen as a threat, and pulled out a holographic device. With a tap, an image appeared in the air above them. It showed Terran soldiers protecting Velar civilians during a pirate attack on a neutral colony. It showed humans risking their lives to save alien children from a burning building. It showed cooperation, not conflict. The council fell into an uneasy silence. We are not your enemies, Jonas said. We do not seek conquest. We seek survival, just as you do. Princess Soraya finally spoke. Fine words, human. But words mean nothing without action. Jonas turned to face her directly. Then test me, Princess. Give me a challenge, and I will prove that humans are worthy of your trust. Her eyes narrowed. The council whispered again. This was unexpected. Before the king could speak, General Kaver smirked. A challenge, you say? Then let's see if you can survive the Velar trial of fire. Soraya's head snapped toward Kaver. That is not a fair test. But Jonas simply nodded. If that is what it takes, then so be it. Soraya stared at him, confused. Did this human not understand the danger? Or was he truly that brave? One thing was certain. Jonas Reed was unlike any human she had ever met. Jonas Reed stood calmly in the middle of the Velar High Council chamber, surrounded by towering alien figures with golden eyes that glowed like embers. The tension in the room was thick, nearly suffocating. He had just agreed to take the Velar trial of fire, a test designed for warriors, not diplomats. Whispers spread among the council members. The human had spoken boldly, but now he had sealed his fate. No outsider had ever taken the trial and survived. Some Velar officials smirked, waiting for him to show fear and back down. But Jonas remained still, his face unreadable. "You are a fool, human," General Caver said with a cruel grin. "The trial of fire is not meant for diplomats. It is meant for warriors. You will break before it is over." Jonas simply met his gaze. "Then let me prove you wrong." Princess Soraya, still seated beside her father, studied Jonas with silent curiosity. She had expected the human to falter, to hesitate. But he did neither. Was he brave, or just reckless? King Valtheris tapped his fingers against his throne and thought. Then, with a wave of his hand, he spoke. "Very well. The human will take the trial at dawn." With that, the meeting was dismissed. The council members left, some shaking their heads, others laughing to themselves. But Soraya remained seated, her gaze fixed on Jonas as he turned to leave. The next morning, Jonas stood before an ancient stone arena deep within the Velar Palace. Massive torches lit up the circular platform, casting long shadows across the ground. Velar warriors and nobles had gathered to watch, whispering amongst themselves. They expected this human to fail. Princess Soraya arrived, standing beside her father at the royal balcony overlooking the arena. She had tried to convince her father to cancel the trial, but he refused. "If the human wants to prove himself, let him," the king had said. Jonas stepped onto the platform. His body was tense, but his mind was calm. He had faced death before, war zones, hostage situations, desperate negotiations. This was different, but fear would not serve him here. A deep voice boomed across the arena. "The trial of fire begins now." At once, the floor beneath Jonas shifted, glowing red-hot in some places and freezing cold in others. The trial was not just about endurance. It was about balance and strategy. A Velar warrior would use strength to push through. A human had to be smarter. Jonas studied the pattern of shifting heat and cold. Instead of running blindly, he moved with patience, stepping only where the ground was neutral. The Velar watching expected him to panic, to burn his feet or freeze in place. Instead, he adapted. Soraya's golden eyes widened slightly. "He's analyzing it," she murmured to herself. The second challenge came. Massive stone pillars shot up from the ground, forcing Jonas to climb or be trapped. Velar warriors would use brute strength to scale them. Jonas, however, relied on agility and strategy, using the smallest footholds to make his way up. General Caver frowned. He is not failing. By the time Jonas reached the final stage, sweat dripped down his face, but his breathing was steady. The last challenge was the worst. A blinding wall of fire separated him from the exit. The Velar had heat-resistant skin, but humans did not. This was supposed to be impossible for him. The crowd watched, waiting for him to give up. Jonas took off his jacket and wrapped it around his arms. He dropped to the ground, crawling beneath the flames where the heat was less intense. It wasn't easy. His skin felt like it was burning, but he refused to stop. With one final push, he rolled to safety. The flames roared behind him, but he was on the other side. The arena fell silent. Jonas stood up slowly, his breath heavy but victorious. He had passed. Princess Soraya's lips parted slightly, her golden eyes reflecting the fire's glow. She had expected him to collapse, to beg for mercy. Instead, he had done what no human, and few Velar, had ever done. For the first time, she felt something unexpected, admiration. The arena was silent. The blazing flames had settled, and the stone pillars remained scorched and cracked from the heat. Yet in the midst of it all, Jonas Reed stood tall, his breathing heavy, his clothes singed but his resolve unshaken. The Velar warriors who had gathered to witness his failure now stared in shock. None of them had expected a human diplomat, a man of words, not war, to survive the trial of fire. From the royal balcony, Princess Soraya couldn't take her eyes off him. She had seen many warriors take this trial. Some succeeded, many failed, but none had taken the same approach as Jonas. He hadn't relied on brute strength. He hadn't panicked. He had used strategy, intelligence, and determination to overcome the challenges. Her father, King Valtherus, leaned forward slightly on his throne, his golden eyes unreadable. The powerful ruler had lived through many wars, had seen many warriors rise and fall. Yet even he seemed intrigued by the human success. He did it, Soraya whispered to herself. This is impossible, General Kaver growled, his hands tightening into fists. A mere human should not have survived this trial. Jonas looked up at the royal balcony, his sharp blue eyes locking onto Soraya's for just a brief moment before he turned his attention to the king. I have completed your challenge, Your Majesty, Jonas said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Does this prove that humans are worthy of peace? The king remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. You have shown resilience, human. But resilience alone does not decide peace. Jonas expected this. He had been in countless negotiations before, and he knew this was only the beginning. Winning a trial did not mean winning their trust. Before anyone could say another word, a loud explosion suddenly shook the ground. The arena trembled, dust and smoke rising into the air. Velar warriors instantly drew their weapons, their sharp golden eyes scanning the area. Jonas's instincts kicked in. He turned just in time to see a group of armed Velar soldiers storm into the arena. Their armor was different from the royal guards, marked with the sigil of the rebellion faction. These were the extremists, Velar warriors who believed humans were enemies and that peace was a weakness. Kill the human, one of them roared, and end this farce. Before Jonas could react, they opened fire. His body moved on its own, instincts kicking in as he dived behind a fallen pillar. Blaster shots sizzled through the air, striking the stone, sending shards flying in every direction. Velar royal guards rushed in, engaging the rebels in battle. The once silent arena was now filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and shouted orders. Jonas risked a glance over the pillar, assessing the situation. The rebels were well trained, using coordinated attacks to push back the royal guards. Soraya watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding. She had suspected the rebellion might act, but she hadn't expected them to attack so boldly. Jonas saw that the rebels were advancing towards the royal balcony, towards Soraya and the king. Without hesitation, he bolted from cover, dodging fire as he ran toward the balcony. His mind screamed at him, "This is not your fight." But his body didn't listen. A rebel warrior broke past the guards, his blade raised high, charging straight at Soraya. Soraya reached for her own weapon, but she wasn't fast enough. Jonas threw himself between them, grabbing the rebel's arm just in time. The alien strength was overwhelming. But Jonas held on, twisting the warrior's wrist with all his might. The blade clattered to the ground. The rebel snarled, trying to shake Jonas off. But the human diplomat didn't back down. Using his momentum, he drove his elbow into the rebel's stomach, making him stumble back. A second rebel raised a blaster. Soraya didn't hesitate this time. She lunged forward, grabbing Jonas's arm and pulling him down as a blast sizzled past them, missing by inches. Jonas turned to look at her in surprise. Soraya smirked. "You're not the only one who can take risks, human." More royal guards arrived, pushing the rebels back. Within minutes, the attack was over. The rebels were either captured or forced to flee. Jonas took a deep breath, his heart still pounding. That had been too close. King Valtherus stood, his expression unreadable as he stared down at the human who had just saved his daughter. Soraya, still catching her breath, glanced at Jonas. For the first time, she wasn't just impressed. She was genuinely curious. "Who are you, Jonas Reed?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Jonas wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned slightly. "Just a diplomat." But everyone in that arena knew he was far more than that. The smoke had settled, but the echoes of battle still lingered in the grand arena. The royal guards had secured the area, dragging away the captured rebels, while medics tended to the injured. Jonas Reed exhaled slowly, feeling the sting of bruises on his body. He had just survived an assassination attempt, and more importantly, he had saved Princess Soraya. King Valtheris stood at the edge of the royal balcony, his sharp golden eyes fixed on the human diplomat below. "You fought well, Jonas Reed." Jonas dusted himself off. "I'm a diplomat, not a warrior, Your Majesty. But when the moment demands it, survival is instinct." The king nodded, as if measuring his words. He turned toward his daughter. "Soraya, are you unarmed?" Soraya took a step forward, glancing at Jonas before answering. "I am fine, father. Thanks to him." The council members, who had once mocked Jonas, now whispered among themselves. The human had proven himself, twice. He had endured the trial of fire, and had stood his ground during a rebel attack. But not everyone was impressed. General Kaver stepped forward, his expression dark. "This changes nothing. This human did not save the Valor. He only saved himself." Jonas turned to face him, unfazed by the hostility. "If that were true, General, I wouldn't have risked my life to protect your princess." Kaver's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the king raised his hand. "Enough." His voice was firm. "The human has earned the right to speak before this council." Jonas straightened his posture, knowing this was the moment he had been waiting for. The Velar High Council chamber was packed. The mood had shifted. Jonas was no longer just an outsider. He was a survivor, and for the first time, some of the Velar lords were actually listening. Standing before them, Jonas spoke with clarity and confidence. "War is easy," he began, his voice echoing in the chamber. "It is easy to hate, to destroy, to see the enemy as nothing more than an obstacle. But peace is difficult. It takes courage." Some of the Velar nodded slightly, while others remained rigid. "I know many of you still see me as an outsider, as a weak human," Jonas continued. "But weakness is not what allowed me to survive your trials. It was not weakness that made me stand in front of your princess to shield her from harm." Soraya folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "I am not here to demand anything from you," Jonas added. I am here to offer something greater than war. An alliance." That caught their attention. Whispers erupted in the room. An alliance? The very idea seemed impossible. General Kaver, as expected, stepped forward. "An alliance?" His voice was laced with disbelief. "Do you truly think we would trust humans so easily?" Jonas didn't flinch. "Trust is not built in a day, General. But I have proven that humans are willing to fight not just for ourselves, but for those we see as equals." The king remained silent, observing the reactions around the room. Jonas continued. I have one request. Let us prove ourselves. Let humans and Valar work together, not as enemies, but as allies. If we fail, then you lose nothing. But if we succeed, then we gain something greater than war, a future. The chamber fell silent. The weight of his words hung in the air. Jonas had no weapons, no army behind him. Yet he had stood in a room full of warriors and spoken of peace. That, in itself, was a different kind of bravery. Finally, King Valtheris rose from his throne. "You have given us much to consider, human," he said. "We will discuss your proposal. But understand this. If you betray us, there will be no second chances." Jonas nodded. "Understood, Your Majesty." As the council meeting ended, Jonas felt a presence beside him. He turned to find Princess Soraya standing close. "You took a great risk today," she said quietly. Jonas chuckled. "Seems to be a habit of mine." For the first time since he arrived, Soraya smiled. "Perhaps there is more to humans than I thought." Jonas smirked. "And perhaps there is more to the Velar than I expected." Soraya glanced at him one last time before walking away. Jonas watched her go, knowing that this was only the beginning. The Valar High Council chamber had never been so silent. The echoes of Jonas Reed's words still lingered in the air. A human had stood in their grand hall and proposed an alliance, something that had never been done before. Cain Valtheris had not rejected the idea outright, but neither had he agreed. He had simply stated that the council would discuss it. That meant Jonas had done something impossible. He had made them consider peace. But not everyone was pleased. General Kavor stormed out of the hall, his expression dark. He was a warrior, not a politician. He saw Jonas's words as an insult to the strength of the Valar. Peace to him was weakness. Princess Soraya, on the other hand, was intrigued. She had always believed humans were fragile, emotional beings. But Jonas had defied her expectations again and again. He had survived the trial of fire. He had protected her during the rebel attack. And now he had spoken to the most powerful figures in the Valar Empire without fear. She wanted to know more. That night, Jonas stood on the balcony of the royal guest chambers, staring at the Valar homeworld's twin moons. He had been given a place to stay while the council deliberated, but he knew his fight was far from over. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Princess Soraya, dressed in a flowing silver robe, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You should be resting," she said, crossing her arms. Jonas chuckled. "I'll rest when I know I haven't come all this way for nothing." Soraya studied him for a moment. "You are either the most foolish human I have ever met, or the bravest." Jonas smirked. "Can't I be both?" She shook her head, but there was a slight smile on her lips. "You don't understand, Jonas. Even if my father agrees to consider peace, there are many who will not accept it. The rebellion is proof of that." Jonas nodded. "I know. There are always those who profit from war. They fear change more than they fear their enemies." Soraya leaned against the railing. "And yet, you still try." Jonas turned to face her fully. "Because someone has to." For a long moment, they stood in comfortable silence, two figures from different worlds, yet bound by the same hope for something better. But that peace was shattered when a loud explosion rocked the palace. The hallways were in chaos. Guards rushed through the corridors, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Jonas and Soraya sprinted toward the source of the disturbance. When they reached the council chamber, they found it in ruins. Smoke filled the air, and several Valar officials lay wounded on the ground. Cain Valtheris stood in the center, his robes singed, but otherwise unharmed. "Assassins," he growled. "They struck while we were in discussion." Jonas scanned the room. "Who is responsible?" One of the wounded guards groaned. "General Kavor. He is gone." Soraya's eyes widened. Kavor did this. A deep, sinking feeling settled in Jonas's stomach. He should have known. The general had been furious after the council meeting. It made sense that he would take matters into his own hands. "He's not just gone," Jonas said, his voice grim. "He's defected." The realization hit like a thunderbolt. Kavor must have planned this all along. The attack was meant to cripple the council and push the Valar into war. "We have to stop him," Soraya said, her fists clenched. "If he reaches the fleet, he will rally the military against the humans." Cain Valtheris nodded. "Take whatever forces you need. Bring him back alive, if possible." Soraya turned to Jonas. "Will you come with me?" Jonas didn't hesitate. "Of course." They moved quickly. A squad of elite royal guards accompanied them as they boarded a small attack cruiser. The ship's engines roared to life, propelling them toward the Valar military command station, where Kavor was last seen. Inside the ship, Jonas adjusted his seatbelt and glanced at Soraya. "You ever had to go against one of your own before?" Soraya's expression darkened. "Not like this." Jonas sighed. "I get it. But if we don't stop him, all of this, everything we've worked for, will be for nothing." Soraya met his gaze. "I know." As the cruiser approached the station, alarms blared across the ship. Enemy ships detected. Jonas tightened his grip on his seat. "Looks like Kavor was expecting us." Soraya's golden eyes flashed with determination. "Then we won't disappoint him." Their ship dove toward the station, heading straight into the battle that would decide the fate of peace. The Velar military command station loomed ahead, its dark metallic structure orbiting a gas giant, surrounded by a fleet of warships. Bright red warning lights flashed across the station, signaling an emergency lockdown. Jonas Reed sat in the co-pilot's seat, gripping the armrests tightly as their small attack cruiser dodged incoming laser fire. "So much for a quiet landing," he muttered. Princess Soraya, seated beside him, clenched the controls with calm precision. Kaver knew we would come. The enemy ships, piloted by Kaver's rebel forces, opened fire. The cruiser's shields flared blue as they absorbed the impact. Jonas could hear the shouts of the royal guards behind them, preparing for battle. Soraya's golden eyes locked onto the station's landing bay. "Hold on," she shouted. She barrel-rolled the cruiser past enemy fighters, dodging another round of blasts before slamming the controls forward. The ship plunged toward the station at an alarming speed. Jonas's stomach lurched. "Bah, Soraya." The ship's landing thrusters fired at the last second, jerking them into a rough but controlled crash inside the hangar. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. But they were in. The moment the ship stopped moving, the royal guards sprang into action, charging out with their weapons ready. Jonas exhaled sharply. "Remind me never to let you fly again." Soraya smirked. "You're still alive, aren't you?" Jonas shook his head, grabbing a blaster from the weapons rack. "Let's go stop a war." The station's corridors were chaos. Alarms blared, warning sirens echoing through the halls as Kaver's rebel forces clashed with loyal Velar troops. Jonas and Soraya led their team through the smoke-filled passageways, moving swiftly toward the command center. Every second they wasted, Kaver got closer to launching an attack on the humans. They reached the main control room just in time to see General Kaver standing at the command console, his golden armor gleaming under the dim emergency lights. His back was turned, but he knew they had arrived. "I was hoping you'd come, Princess," Kaver said without looking up. "And of course, the human." Soraya stepped forward, weapon raised. "This is over, Kaver. Surrender." Kaver slowly turned, his golden eyes filled with fierce determination. "Surrender," he scoffed. "You are a fool, Soraya. This peace you seek is an illusion. The humans will betray us, just like they betrayed others before." Jonas took a step closer. "You don't know that." Kaver's expression darkened. "And you do." Jonas met his gaze without fear. "I know that war will destroy everything. I know that Velar and humans have more to gain by working together than by killing each other." Kaver's fingers tightened around the command console. "Words mean nothing, human." Jonas took a breath. This was it, the moment where he had to prove that a diplomat's power wasn't in weapons or strength, but in something greater. "Then don't listen to my words," Jonas said. "Listen to hers." He turned to Soraya. She hesitated for only a moment before lowering her weapon and stepping forward. "Kaver," she said, her voice steady, "I have fought battles. I have seen death, and I have seen what hate does to people." She gestured toward Jonas. "This human has done nothing but fight for peace. He risked his life to save me, to save the Council, to prove that humans are not our enemies. Tell me, do you truly believe all humans are our foes, even when one stands here, willing to die for our people?" Kaver hesitated. Jonas could see it, the doubt creeping into the general's mind. He wasn't a mindless killer. He was a Velar warrior who had spent his life preparing for war, convinced that it was inevitable. But what if it wasn't? Kaver clenched his fists. "It's too late." Jonas's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Kaver stepped aside, revealing the console. A countdown was displayed in Velar script. Soraya's eyes widened. No. The attack was already launched. The Velar fleet, now under Kaver's orders, was preparing to fire upon a human diplomatic vessel stationed just beyond the planet's orbit. If they succeeded, war would begin within minutes. Jonas acted without thinking. He sprinted toward the control panel. slamming his hands against the console. Kaver lunged to stop him, but Soraya was faster. She blocked Kaver's attack, their blades clashing in a deadly duel. Jonas scanned the screen. A security lock. He needed an override. Think, Jonas. Think. He remembered something from earlier. The king had given Soraya command authority. Her access code could override the launch sequence. He shouted over his shoulder, "Soraya, your code, now." Soraya kicked Kaver back and turned to the console, typing in the override sequence. The screen flashed red, then green. Missile launch. Aborted. The Velar fleet stood down. Jonas and Soraya exhaled in relief. Kaver stared at the screen in disbelief. No, this is wrong. Soraya turned to him, her eyes filled with regret, not hate. No, Kaver, this is right. Kaver fell to his knees, defeated. The guards rushed in, taking him into custody. Jonas leaned against the console, exhaustion washing over him. Soraya glanced at him. You just stopped a war with a few words and a little bit of luck. Jonas chuckled. That's the diplomat's way. She smiled. Perhaps there is more to diplomacy than I thought. Jonas grinned. And perhaps there's more to warriors than just fighting. As the station alarms faded, they both knew the real work had just begun. The Velar Military Command Station was quiet. The alarms had stopped, the flashing red lights had dimmed, and the battle was over. General Kaver had been defeated and captured, his attempt to start a war foiled. Jonas Reed stood beside Princess Soraya, staring at the command console where the war order had been canceled just moments before. He could still feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had done it. They had done it. The Velar fleet had stood down, and the Terran coalition diplomats were safe. For the first time in years, there was a real chance for peace between the two civilizations. Soraya turned to him, her golden eyes filled with something unreadable. You saved my people today, Jonas. Jonas smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. I thought we saved them together. She let out a soft chuckle. Perhaps we did. The aftermath. The next day, Jonas and Soraya stood in the Velar High Council chamber, facing King Valtherus. Kaver had been stripped of his rank and placed under high security arrest for his crimes. His supporters had either surrendered or fled, their rebellion crushed before it could turn into full-scale war. The council was still in shock. No one had expected a human diplomat to stop a war, let alone survive a Velar warrior's trial and an assassination attempt. King Valtherus sat on his throne, his face unreadable as he gazed at Jonas. You are an unusual human, Jonas Reed. Jonas smiled slightly. I'll take that as a compliment, Your Majesty. The king leaned forward. You came here seeking peace. You risked your life to prove that your people are not our enemies. Tell me, do you still believe an alliance is possible? Jonas didn't hesitate. More than ever. The council murmured among themselves. Some were still skeptical, but the events of the past few days had changed many minds. Valtherus turned to Soraya. And you, my daughter, what do you think? Soraya straightened. I believe Jonas has shown us something rare, Father. A strength that does not come from war, but from understanding. I believe peace is worth fighting for. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. The Velar Dominion will begin peace talks with the Terran coalition. The chamber erupted in whispers. Some officials looked relieved, others uncertain. But the decision had been made. Jonas felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had come here expecting resistance, expecting danger, but he had never expected to gain allies. Soraya turned to him and offered her hand. It seems we are no longer enemies, human. Jonas grinned and shook her hand. I never thought we were. A new beginning. Later that night, Jonas stood once again on the royal balcony, looking up at the twin moons of the Velar homeworld. The sky was peaceful, but his mind was still racing. Everything had changed. The Velar and humans were about to enter a new era of diplomacy, But there was still much work to be done. Treaties to be signed, old wounds to be healed. And yet, for the first time in a long while, Jonas felt hopeful. You looked deep in thought, human. He turned to see Soraya standing beside him, her arms crossed, a hint of amusement in her golden eyes. Jonas smiled, just thinking about what comes next. She nodded, looking out over the city. There will be opposition. Some will never accept peace. Jonas chuckled. That's politics for you. Soraya was silent for a moment. Then she spoke softly. You changed the way I see your kind, Jonas. Jonas raised an eyebrow. And how is that? She turned to him. I always believed humans were fragile, weak. But now, I see that your strength is different. It is not about battle. It is about never giving up, even when the odds are against you. Jonas smirked. And I used to think Velar only cared about war. But I guess I was wrong about that too. She gave him a small, rare smile. They stood in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds, bound by the same vision for the future. Finally, Soraya spoke. You are not like any human I have met before, Jonas Reed. Jonas grinned. And you are not like any Valar I've met, Princess Soraya. The wind whispered through the balcony, carrying with it the promise of change. For the first time in history, a human and a Valar had stood together, not as enemies, but as allies. And maybe, just maybe, as something more. The end.